Most weekends, I sat in the same corner of the cafe where my family gathered for brunch. It had become a routine over the years, a quiet tradition nestled in the hum of Green Lake mornings. The wood chairs creaked slightly when leaned on, and the striped curtains let in a softened light that caught the edges of tablecloths and coffee cups. My spot was always the end of the table by the window, half shielded from the chatter. The coffee in front of me had long gone cold, but I kept stirring it slowly, more out of habit than hope. A quiet swirl, then a pause. Stir again. It calmed me, gave my hands something to do while my mind stayed still. No one noticed I hadn't said a word. That was typical. My family had long ago learned to fill the silence around me without bothering to ask why I kept it. It wasn't personal. It was just easier that way. Especially when Ashley was there. Ashley's laugh burst across the table like a champagne cork, bright and loud, the kind that made heads turn from neighboring tables. "I'm just saying," she said, flipping her freshly highlighted hair over one shoulder. "It's kind of hilarious that someone in their 30s can still get away with not having a real job." There was a pause, just a breath long. Then a few chuckles from my aunt and uncle, half-hearted and unsure. My mother glanced at me, then back at Ashley. She shifted awkwardly in her seat and muttered something that sounded like, "Ashley, maybe let's not." But Ashley only shrugged, the kind of shrug that said she knew she was right. I didn't look at her. I just pressed my lips together and kept stirring. The spoon clinked lightly against the side of the mug. To Ashley, silence was weakness. She'd always believed that. If you weren't speaking, you weren't participating. And if you weren't participating, you had nothing to offer. My father changed the subject, pointing out that the eggs Benedict tasted saltier than usual. Ashley leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs, her new designer boots catching the light. The thing about Ashley was, she never stopped performing. Even at brunch, even surrounded by family, there was always a stage. I used to wonder who she performed for. Lately, I thought it might be herself. I listened without listening. Stories about a friend's engagement party, a Pilates instructor who didn't show up, a guy she'd matched with on an app and immediately unmatched, all told with the timing of someone used to being the most interesting voice in the room. No one asked what I had been working on. Not that I expected them to. My role in the family was to be the quiet one, the one who politely smiled at the right moments and kept to herself. It had been that way since childhood, and I had stopped trying to change it a long time ago. But in the silence they had assigned me, I had built something. Neuroflux. A word none of them knew. A company they had never heard me mention. A system designed to process and predict behavior patterns using adaptive algorithms. A small idea turned into a powerful platform, now used by hospitals, banks, and a growing list of government clients. And I was there from the beginning. Half the architecture was mine. My name was buried deep in internal files and founder contracts. Nowhere public, by choice. Ashley twirled her fork between her fingers and grinned. "Anyway, I've already started applying to new places. There's this one company, really up and coming, Neuroflux. Heard of it?" The name dropped like a coin in water. My hand paused mid-stir. "They're looking for someone to manage budget operations," she continued, checking her phone briefly before setting it down again. "Honestly, I'd be perfect for it. They'd be lucky to have me." I didn't speak. I just let the spoon rest inside the mug and glanced out the window, watching the sun spill over the sidewalk outside. A couple walked past pushing a stroller. A jogger crossed at the corner. Life moved quietly out there. Ashley kept talking, unaware. My parents nodded along. I sipped my coffee, bitter and cold, and said nothing. She had no idea whose company she was walking into. And I wasn't about to tell her. Not yet. When I was 12, my mother threw me a birthday party. The living room was full of balloons and cousins, my name written in glitter across a banner that drooped slightly in the middle. There was a chocolate cake with 12 candles waiting to be lit. I remember standing in front of it, ready to make a wish, when Ashley came bursting into the room, barefoot and breathless, holding a trophy that gleamed in the late afternoon light. "I won!" she yelled, holding it high like an Olympic medal. "First place at the regional dance competition." Everyone clapped. Someone whistled. My mom rushed to her, arms wide, practically lifting Ashley off the ground in her excitement. The candles on my cake burned low while Ashley told the story of her victory, reenacting the final twirl she nailed in front of a stunned panel of judges. No one asked what I had wished for. I didn't even blow out the candles. I just watched the flame flicker until it died on its own. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the living room was quiet again, I took the old laptop my dad had given me and went up to my room. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, opened the lid, and resumed what I had been building in secret. A primitive algorithm that sorted patterns from school test scores. It was slow, clunky, and constantly broke, but I loved it. That was always the difference between Ashley and me. She loved the performance. I loved the process. She stood on stages. I sat in corners. She thrived on attention. I found peace in silence. As we grew older, that difference only widened. Ashley went on to study communications and theater arts. She starred in local productions, even had a short-lived web series that attracted a decent following. There were parties, premieres, glossy photo shoots in rented studios. My parents cheered her on every step of the way, beaming with pride when her face appeared in a regional magazine's Rising Talents feature. I took a different path, one most of them barely noticed. I got into a technology institute outside the city. Nothing fancy, not the kind of school anyone brags about over brunch. But it was there I met Michael Reed. He was tall, soft-spoken, with a mind that worked like a whiteboard full of ideas. We met in a seminar on data ethics and started talking about predictive modeling over instant noodles in the dorm kitchen. What began as a conversation turned into a partnership. By the end of junior year, we were working out of a friend's garage in Capitol Hill. The walls were barely insulated, and in winter we typed in gloves. But we were building something real, a system that could learn from behavioral data and make predictions in real time. It started with online retail, then expanded to healthcare, finance, and risk management. We called it Neuroflux. When the time came to pitch it to investors, Michael went up on stage. He smiled, answered questions, handled the spotlight like he was born to. I stayed in the back, usually near the exit, just in case the demo failed and I had to patch it quickly. It wasn't that I lacked confidence. I simply didn't crave the attention. I didn't want my face in magazine profiles or my voice recorded in podcasts. I wanted to build. I wanted to create something that could speak for itself, even if no one knew my name. Michael respected that. From the start, we agreed his name would be the one people saw. Mine would stay in the background, tucked into legal documents and technical blueprints. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. And that choice gave me the freedom to focus on what mattered most to me. We signed our first contract with a mid-size bank in our second year. Within 3 years, Neuroflux was powering data systems in over a dozen sectors. We moved out of the garage and into a clean, glass-paneled office downtown. But my habits didn't change. I still worked late, still preferred remote meetings, still wore old hoodies and noise-canceling headphones while mapping out architecture on a whiteboard in my apartment. And even as the company's valuation grew, even as Michael appeared on the cover of tech journals and shook hands at conferences, I stayed where I had always been, behind the curtain, adjusting the lights, making sure everything on stage ran smoothly. So when Ashley said she had applied to Neuroflux, it didn't feel like fate. It felt like the past and present brushing shoulders without realizing it. She had no idea what she was walking into, and I had no intention of stopping her. The notification came in on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on my couch, the one by the window, a blanket wrapped loosely around my legs, and a cup of tea growing lukewarm beside my laptop. I had just finished reviewing a quarterly infrastructure proposal when a small flag popped up in the corner of the screen. New application received. Internal candidate recommendation pending review. I clicked it absently at first, expecting another resume from a recent graduate or someone pivoting into data strategy from a different field. But the moment I saw the name at the top of the document, everything in me stilled. Ashley Marie Carson, the same voice that had filled my ears that weekend over brunch, the same laugh that carried across crowded rooms. And now, her name sat quietly on a digital form inside the HR portal of the company she had just casually bragged about. The irony was sharp, almost funny, almost. I opened the file. The cover letter was what I expected, confident, energetic, unapologetically direct. Ashley knew how to sell herself. She wrote about her experience in budget planning, her ability to optimize team spending, her interest in streamlining complex financial systems to drive impact. It sounded rehearsed, polished. It was probably the same letter she had sent to 10 other companies. But there was something else in the phrasing. A hunger. The kind of tone someone uses when they are trying to pull themselves up from something they are too proud to name. I scanned her resume. Her last position had ended 6 months earlier, a mid-level role at a consulting firm that had since downsized. There was a small gap. She didn't explain it. Under skills, she listed financial modeling, variance analysis, and stakeholder reporting. I noticed she had taken a few recent online courses in data visualization. She was trying. That part wasn't for show. I sat back and let the silence fill the room. The rain against the window made soft patterns on the glass. Somewhere in the building, someone was vacuuming the hallway. Ordinary sounds, all of them distant. It would have been easy to reject the application. A single click. I could have marked it incomplete or flagged it for follow-up. No one would question it. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward, reread the application from top to bottom, then clicked the approval button. Recommended for first-round interview. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to watch her stumble or fail. This wasn't about proving something either. I had nothing to prove. I was curious, that was all. Curious about who Ashley might be when there was no one watching. Curious about how she would act in a world where applause didn't come easily. Curious whether she could bring something real to a place I had poured myself into, line by line, year by year. She didn't know I was here, and I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. I watched the application status update on the screen. Submitted, reviewed, approved. A part of me tightened, just slightly, and then I closed the laptop and picked up my tea. It had gone cold. I took a sip anyway. Ashley started at Neuroflux 2 weeks after her application was approved. I knew the exact day she arrived because I watched her badge get activated in the system at 9:03 a.m., along with a note from security that read, "New hire, escorted to floor 9. I didn't go in that day. I didn't need to. From where I sat, in the comfort of my apartment on the 18th floor, I could see everything I needed to see. Neuroflux ran on systems I helped design. I had built much of the company's internal architecture myself, budgeting workflows, data access protocols, approval chains. If someone opened a document, changed a figure, flagged a request, I saw it. Ashley's first few days were predictable. She introduced herself to the team with her usual brightness, full of handshakes and confident eye contact. In the internal chat, she signed her messages with exclamation points and added emojis to team-wide announcements, which promptly disappeared after someone in HR reminded her of the company's communication standards. She was assigned to the finance division, reporting to a manager named Paul. I had only spoken to Paul in 2 meetings over the past year, but I trusted him. He was firm, fair, and didn't tolerate shortcuts. I made a mental note to keep an eye on how Ashley handled structure. Through system logs, I tracked her document history. She reviewed past budgets, flagged a few errors in a recent proposal, and commented thoughtfully on a team presentation. She was adjusting, learning, settling in. I found myself surprised, not by her confidence, but by her competence. Beneath all her showmanship, Ashley actually understood numbers. But then the questions started. The first came during a finance team huddle, captured in a transcript I reviewed later that evening. "Who's Elizabeth R.?" Ashley had asked casually, eyes apparently scanning a shared screen. "I've seen that name on half the documents we use, but I've never met her. Is she real, or is that like a code name for legal?" Someone had chuckled. Someone else said, "Honestly, I've never seen her either." Ashley leaned back and said, "She's probably just a figurehead, a ghost approver, like those mythical founders no one's actually met." I read the log twice, then I smiled. A ghost approver, that was new. Over the next week, Ashley's curiosity deepened. She began asking more questions, not in an obvious way, but sprinkled into hallway conversations and Slack threads. Each time, I noted the wording. She was testing. She wanted to understand how decisions were made behind the scenes. And I kept watching. Late one night, I opened the server activity panel and saw her name again. Ashley Carson. She had just downloaded a copy of last quarter's spending report and a related memo on revised budget strategies. It had my signature at the bottom. Elizabeth R. approved 2:11 a.m. That night, she stayed logged into the system an hour longer than usual. I wondered what she was thinking, if she was connecting the dots, or if she simply couldn't let go of something she didn't understand. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I got the alert. Internal access request submitted. Carson a request level. Extended budget records. Target directory. Historical approvals. Q1, Q3. Executive sign-offs. It was subtle, tucked under a routine audit request, but I saw it for what it was. She was looking deeper now. The ghost was no longer just a curiosity. She wanted to know who I was. I hadn't planned to be at the office that night. Normally, I came in after hours on Fridays or Mondays, when the building was mostly empty and the lights in the shared spaces glowed low and soft. But a server audit had flagged a minor anomaly, and I wanted to check the physical systems myself. The ninth floor was quiet when I stepped out of the elevator. The hum of electronics blended with the faint tapping of rain against the tall windows. I walked down the hallway past the main conference room, heading toward the back where the restricted records were stored. The door to the archive alcove was ajar. I paused. Inside, someone stood motionless, holding a single sheet of paper in both hands. The soft ceiling light reflected off the glossy printout. I didn't have to see her face to know it was Ashley. I recognized the silhouette, the sharp lines of her posture, the stillness of someone not quite breathing. She looked up. Her eyes met mine, wide and stunned. "Elizabeth?" Her voice cracked slightly at the edges. I stepped into the doorway but said nothing. I wasn't sure what to say yet. She held out the paper, though she didn't look at it again. "This says you're the co-founder. Neuroflux Systems Incorporated, founding architect, 50% ownership." She swallowed. "This is real?" I nodded once. Ashley stared at me, like she was trying to fit a stranger's face onto someone she had known her whole life. "You've been here this whole time, running things, approving budgets, signing my reports, and you didn't say anything." "I didn't need to," I said quietly. "You let me apply. You let me work here." She laughed once, not in amusement, but disbelief. "Why?" I folded my hands in front of me. "Because I wanted to see who you were when no one told you who I was." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped closer, but kept my voice steady. "You were doing fine. You were learning. You were earning your place. I didn't want that to be about me." "But it is about you," she said, her voice dropping. "It always was. This whole place. Everything here has your fingerprints." I hesitated, then replied, "Not everything. Michael built this with me. The team carries it forward. But yes, I was here from the beginning. I wrote the first models. I drafted the first architecture. I signed the first contracts. Just quietly." She looked back at the paper in her hands, then at me again. "All those times I said you were hiding, that you didn't have a real job, you never corrected me." "I didn't need to," I said. She blinked. I could see her trying to process it, to bridge the gap between the sister she thought she knew and the person standing in front of her. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why keep it a secret? Why not tell anyone?" "Because I wanted to build something real, not chase recognition," I answered. "I didn't want cameras or interviews. I wanted freedom. I chose the background. It's where I do my best work." Ashley stood there, still holding the paper, her knuckles pale from gripping it so tightly. Then, slowly, she lowered her arms. Her voice was almost a whisper now. "You were signing my paycheck." I nodded. She didn't say anything more. She turned, took one step toward the door, then paused. "I need a minute," she said, and then she walked out. I remained in the quiet room, the server lights blinking in the corner like a heartbeat. The door eased shut behind her. I leaned back against the cool wall and let the silence settle around me. It was done. The truth had a shape now, a face, a name, and nothing would be quite the same again. Ashley didn't speak to me the next day, or the day after. I wasn't surprised. Truth takes time to settle, especially when it breaks apart something you've believed for years. She came into the office at her usual hour, nodded politely to those around her, and sat at her desk like nothing had happened. But the edges of her posture were different. There was less bounce in her stride, less spark in her voice. Something had quieted. In meetings, she no longer led with volume. She listened more, asked better questions. I watched through project logs and internal updates as she followed threads deeper, added detailed annotations, and double-checked figures others missed. She stayed late once or twice, alone in the finance room, her cursor blinking steadily in shared sheets. I never said a word. One Thursday morning, I arrived early, hours before anyone else, and walked to her desk. I carried a small walnut box I had kept tucked in a drawer in my apartment for years. Inside, it was a navy cloth notebook and a black ink pen I had always liked. Simple, weighty, reliable. I left the notebook and pen on her desk along with a folded note. Ashley, you are capable. I believe in what you're building. Keep going. Elizabeth. No title, no explanation, just that. I didn't expect a thank you. I didn't expect anything. But I left the office that day feeling lighter. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Ashley began to speak again in meetings, but differently. She no longer pushed to dominate. She offered insight with care, pausing before she spoke, measuring not just what she said, but why she said it. Colleagues responded in kind. There was a growing respect, a recognition. And then, 3 weeks after our encounter in the archive room, a proposal landed in the internal system under her name. Initiative title, Touch the Future. It outlined a mentorship program for junior employees, focused on support for interns from underrepresented backgrounds, especially young women in finance and data systems. She proposed a small but meaningful budget reallocation, aimed at offering free weekly workshops led by experienced staff across departments. I read the proposal in full, slowly, twice. Near the end, in a quiet section labeled Vision and Inspiration, she had written one line, inspired by the quiet legacy of those who build without asking for applause. There was no name attached, but I knew what she meant. I didn't approve the proposal immediately. I let it sit for a day. Not as a test, but as a pause, to take in what it meant. When I did approve it, I added one comment in the margin. Good work. Let's build it right. After that, I began noticing small things. Ashley no longer sat at the center of every conversation. She stood beside interns during presentations, invited questions, deflected praise. She started walking the long way to the break room, stopping by teams she had barely acknowledged before. She didn't say anything else to me, but every once in a while I'd catch a glance across a meeting table or a nod in passing that said what words couldn't. Something was beginning to mend. Maybe not perfectly, but honestly. And that was enough for now. The cafe was just as I remembered it. Same creaky chairs, same striped curtains filtering in the soft morning sun. The smell of waffles and maple syrup drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the low murmur of conversation and clinking silverware. We had sat at this table so many times it felt almost like part of our family, a silent witness to years of stories, laughter, and the kind of tension that simmers just beneath the surface. But something about the air felt different that morning. Ashley arrived 5 minutes late, but not in her usual swirl of drama. No heels clicking sharply against the tile. No oversized sunglasses or bright lipstick. She wore a simple white blouse and dark jeans, her hair pulled back neatly, her face bare. When she sat across from me, she gave a small nod. I returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. The conversation flowed easily, mostly about unimportant things. My mother talked about a new flower bed she had planted. My father grumbled good-naturedly about the price of car repairs. It was the kind of comfortable noise that people fall into when no one is trying too hard. Then Uncle Raymond leaned in and asked, with a crooked smile, "So, Elizabeth, are you still doing that little freelance coding thing from home? What do you call it, data puzzles or something?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Ashley set her coffee cup down and looked straight at him. "Actually," she said clearly, "Elizabeth is one of the smartest people I know. Without her, I wouldn't be where I am today. And she didn't just do freelance work. She built something extraordinary, quietly, while the rest of us were too loud to notice." The table went still for a second. Uncle Raymond blinked. My mother glanced at me, then back at Ashley. My father let out a soft breath and nodded, almost to himself. Ashley didn't shrink from the attention like she might have months ago. But she didn't bask in it either. She simply picked up her cup again and sipped, her gaze steady. And just like that, something shifted. Not just in Ashley, but in everyone at the table. The way they looked at me, the way they listened. as if, for the first time, they realized I had been there all along, not just occupying space, but building something they had never thought to ask about. After the meal, as we all stood to leave, I bent down to grab my bag. Ashley walked past me slowly, then paused at my side. She leaned in, her voice low enough that only I could hear it. "I know I was wrong," she said, "and I won't be the same person again." I straightened and looked at her, not with judgment or distance, but something simpler, a kind of quiet peace. "I never needed an apology," I said. She nodded once, then turned and walked ahead to join the others. That afternoon, I went home and made myself a cup of tea. The apartment was still, filled with the soft sound of city traffic far below. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and stood by the window, looking out over Lake Union. The water moved gently, clouds reflecting in broken patterns on its surface. My laptop chimed with a message. It was from Michael. "Heard brunch wasn't half bad today." I smiled and typed back. "Not bad. Let's call it a new beginning." I closed the laptop, took a sip of tea, and let the quiet fill the room. It turns out, understanding doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through a softened voice or a glance across the table. It grows not through grand gestures, but through slow, deliberate change. Ashley and I may never be perfect sisters, but we've stopped standing on opposite sides of the room. And for me, that's more than enough. In this story, you followed Elizabeth, a quiet yet brilliant woman who built a life of purpose outside the spotlight. Through her journey, we witnessed how strength can live in silence and how identity does not always need an audience to be meaningful. Her relationship with her sister Ashley began in distance and misunderstanding, but slowly evolved into recognition, respect, and quiet reconciliation. This story reminds us that growth does not always shout. Sometimes it arrives in small gestures, quiet changes, and the willingness to see someone fully for the first time. Elizabeth never asked to be seen, yet in time her truth spoke louder than any performance. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone in your own life, we invite you to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that explore the quieter side of human connection.